With seemingly every musician announcing that they're going on tour soon, and a couple of relevant suggestions in my DMs, today I'm going to look back at every major concert that I've been to and put them in a tier list. I've been privileged and lucky enough to attend a few dozen shows over the past decade or so, and I think this is going to be a really interesting sort of icebreaker. It'll be fun for me telling you these stories, and I can't wait to hear about your own memories in the comments too. But before we begin, we need this disclaimer now more than ever. This is going to be the most subjective list that I ever make. How much I enjoyed a given concert is dependent on a ton of different factors that I'll go on to explain. And for example, I have some of my all-time favorite musicians in lower tiers and people I don't even listen to in higher tiers. You'll see. My F tier encompasses the only somewhat negative experiences I've had. While it wasn't really her fault, in dead last we have Kitty, also known as Kitty Pryde, who was opening up for Danny Brown on the Old and Reckless tour. Long story short, her mic wasn't really working, so she was awkwardly walking around stage looking super uncomfortable, and I think only a handful of people knew who she was anyway. However, I did know who she was, so before the show, when she was just alone standing at the bar, she was kind enough to chat with me for a second and take a picture. Unfortunately, next is Vince Staples opening up for ScHoolboy Q on the Oxymoron tour. This was a case where the crowd was giving him absolutely nothing, so he reciprocated the same energy. I don't really blame him, but it made for a pretty terrible set. I'm adding this because I think it's funny, but technically the Plain White Tees were my first ever concert when I was like 11, and I didn't know how else to rank this. My father and I were walking around and just kind of wandered into the venue as they were playing. The super corny anecdote that I tell about this one is that their encore song was obviously Hey There Delilah, but they changed the lyrics to Hey There Rhode Island. D tier is stuff that I enjoyed but had somewhat of an issue with. I'm gonna combine these next two because it was the same night, and I have pretty identical feelings about both of them. Big KRIT opened up for J. Cole on the Sideline Story tour, and I was a huge fan of these guys when they were coming up. They were putting out some of the best mixtapes in hip-hop, but that point when a musician progresses to fame and success can often be make or break as a fan. This one just comes down to me not preferring the new stuff that they were playing, and it was a little disappointing. Kendrick Lamar opened up for Kanye on the Yeezus tour, and I can hear the sounds of everyone's jaws hitting the floor right now, so let me explain. I had seen him within that same year at a smaller, intimate club, and now he was opening up for my favorite artist of all time, who I had never seen, in a huge stadium that he might not have been ready for. It sounds absolutely ridiculous, but I was watching Kendrick Lamar live, just waiting for it to be over. 21 Savage opened up for Young Thug on the High Horse tour, and he probably did 15 casual minutes off of Savage mode, and then walked off. However, before he came on, there were two local rappers that were opening up for him. 21 Savage walked on stage a couple minutes into their set, and kicked them off because he wanted to start early. That is the single funniest thing that I've ever seen at a concert. With ScHoolboy Q on the aforementioned Oxymoron tour, he was solid and I did get a chance to meet him after the show, but throughout the night, he was higher than any human being I've ever encountered. He was rapping in slow motion, but it was still pretty good. I saw Lupe Fiasco on the Lasers tour, and he was honestly a great performer. The stage production was pretty cool, there was a live band, and it was awesome when he was playing the hits, but the big downside was that he was also playing lasers. C tier is stuff that I liked but didn't quite love, and again, I'm sure there's shock and awe that he's this low. I saw Kendrick shortly after Good Kid Mad City dropped, and it was perfectly fine. I'll put it this way, I think the songs he was playing were much better than he was as a live performer. I don't have anything bad to say about it at all, and I'm sure he's gotten more captivating over time, but this night he was just okay. I've gotten the chance to go to the historic Newport Folk Festival 4 times now, and it's been an amazing way to see awesome music, so whenever I refer to Folk Fest, that's what I'm talking about. First up, Fleet Foxes had a beautiful set, but it was honestly one of the more forgettable bands that I've seen live. Isaiah Rashad also opened up for Q on the Oxymoron tour, and this was an interesting dynamic. That same hostile crowd that wasn't feeling Vince had a few dozen people that were clearly obsessed with Sylvia demo, and Isaiah was putting his all into that performance for us. It's weird when you can tell that only select people in the crowd are enjoying themselves, but I had a good time with it. Snarky Puppy was at the sister festival of Folk Fest, the Newport Jazz Festival, and I basically loved and hated them all at once. I've explained this on the channel before, but assuming two musicians were both competent, I'd much rather listen to the one that's conveying an emotional connection to the listener rather than the ultra technically skilled one that's drowning in their own arrogance. It is super impressive to see musicians of that quality, but after a while, I got kinda sick of watching them pat themselves on the back. After 21 Savage, Young Thug played an above average set on the High Horse tour. What I remember most is him changing his outfit not one, but two different times, and then watching him do Lifestyle in this local auditorium was wonderful. Seeing Aries on his Welcome Home tour was really fun. It's a one-of-a-kind feeling when you discover an artist, listen to them nonstop, then you go to a tiny sold-out show, and everything lives up to your expectations. Edward Sharpe and the Magnetic Zeros were at Folkfest, and this is a perfect example of what the festival's all about. There's a real sense of togetherness and community, with good music being the nucleus of everything there. They were letting loose, and it always comes across when the musician seems like they actually want to be there. The Long Live ASAP tour was Danny Brown and ScHoolboy Q opening up for ASAP Mob, and that is one of the wildest bills I've ever heard of. Danny's who we're going to talk about first, and this was the astonishing skinny jeans and a perm era of Danny Brown. Either you loved him, or you were completely and utterly repulsed by him. Triple X is one of my favorite albums ever, so I was having the time of my life, but it was also very, very funny seeing all the confusion from most of the people there that came for ASAP and Q and did not know who Danny was. It's probably the most bizarre atmosphere that I've ever been a part of at a show, but I was down for it. I saw Angel Olsen at Folkfest promoting My Woman, and she was one of the coolest musicians I've ever seen. There was such a swagger about everything she did, her voice was enchanting, and it was also extremely windy, but that somehow only enhanced her stage presence. Now we've got Q at the Long Live ASAP tour, and this was a much less intoxicated version of him. He was full of energy, rapping like he had something to prove, and Habits and Contradictions is my personal favorite release from him, so it was nice to see that live. B Tier is full of shows that I loved from beginning to end, and to close that night that I keep talking about, seeing ASAP Mob perform with the occasional feature from Danny and Q was fantastic. It feels like a cheat code to having a lively set, but when you put 10 plus guys on stage, including Rocky, Ferg, Yams, and so on, how could it not be entertaining? P.S. One of my all-time favorite concert memories was being a small 14-year-old kid at this show, and this enormous man that introduced himself as Kentucky befriended me, told me that he would beat up anyone that looked at me the wrong way, and I specifically remember us being arm in arm and going crazy when Chief Keef's I Don't Like played during an intermission. Another group jam-packed with energy and people on stage, seeing Brockhampton for the second time on the Love Your Parents tour was great, but simply put, it did not live up to my hype of the first show that I'll explain later. Jeff Tweedy of Wilco was at Folkfest doing a solo set with an acoustic guitar. Yankee Hotel Foxtrot is an all-time favorite of mine, so hearing Jesus Etc. and I Am Trying to Break Your Heart was something that I'll never forget. In general, it was a very chill, laid-back set, but that's refreshing during a long day at a festival. Nathaniel Rateliff and the Night Sweats and then Shakey Graves are a couple of Folkfest regulars that I'm gonna describe in the same way. I like a couple of their songs, but I don't really tend to listen to them in my free time. With that being said, they put on some of the most spirited, vibrant shows that I've ever attended. I highly recommend seeing them if you get the chance. Seeing Danny Brown for the second time now on the old tour was crazy. The tiny venue was filled to the brim with superfans, he has an unbelievable stage presence, and he was a really charming guy too. Regina Spektor at Folkfest was an example of me really getting lost in the music. She plays with such passion, she's a great storyteller, and it was the kind of show that reminded me why I love this stuff so much. Alabama Shakes headlined one year, and Brittany Howard's voice is everything. Seemingly infinite power and soul, they're another group where you're constantly in awe of how smooth and effortless it seems for them. A Tier is going beyond me loving the concert. These are genuine sentimental experiences that are very important to me. Bay Faction were a band that I absolutely loved, and this night had the energy of a house show. There's a direct line of contact from the performers to the crowd, and everybody's on the same wavelength. It was a very wholesome night. A few years ago at Folkfest, I saw John Prine play some of his greatest hits, with various musicians coming on stage to join him. Throughout the set, there was Roger Waters from Pink Floyd, Justin Vernon of Bon Iver, Nathaniel Rateliff, Jim James from My Morning Jacket, and then eventually, most of the people from that day came on stage for the finale. More than anything, I take away the historical significance of this moment, and it's something I feel very lucky to have witnessed. Maggie Rogers at Folkfest was the happiest I've ever seen a musician on stage, just enjoying playing music. She seemed to really appreciate the history of the festival. She was flying across stage with this cape thing, they had everyone dancing, and while most of the time the fans feel privileged to see a musician, it really seemed like she felt privileged to play for us that day. I saw Yasin Bey, aka Mos Def, on his 38th birthday, and the man was just oozing with personality, style, and joy. He was rapping on unreleased J Dilla beats, they brought out a cake for him, and it was a special night. My anecdote for this one is that because it was his birthday, he was saying, "Make some noise if you were born in the 60s, then 70s and 80s, to see the ages of the people in the crowd, and I was younger than he expected anyone to be, and my dad was older than he expected anyone to be." I always thought that was really cool. Hozier's set at Folkfest was a perfect blend of emotion, skill, beauty, and so on. Some songs that you could dance to, some that were harder hitting, others that were so soft and pretty that you could hear a pin drop. It was really something else. That first record is excellent in my opinion, and it translates so well to a live show. P.S. I got the chance to meet him later on, and that was 100% the best interaction I've ever had with a famous person. Such a sweet, genuine guy. The first time I saw Brockhampton was on Jennifer's tour, and it was out of this world. We were in the basement of this tiny venue. There was barely enough room for the whole group on stage. The whole crowd was packed like sardines, and it was remarkable. I had an immense amount of hype and love for that group, especially a couple weeks after dropping Saturation 2, and fun fact, I made my first ever YouTube video for this channel about them days before this concert. Again at Folkfest, the Avett brothers are next level performers. This is the type of group where they're exponentially better live than in their studio recordings. They have this X factor where it's clear that the medium of performance is what they were born to do. They're playing with their hearts on their sleeves, and I can't recommend seeing them enough. P.S. They did a cover of Black Hole Sun in honor of Chris Cornell, who passed away a couple months prior, and I was singing at the top of my lungs. Alright, before you say anything about this being cringe, 21 Pilots on the Emotional Roadshow tour was an unbelievable show. I feel like, yeah, they're known for this, but good God, the concert was bursting at the seams with entertainment. First and foremost, Tyler and Josh were lively and they're good at what they do, but then they bring the openers on stage for sing-along covers. Then they completely change locations to do older material. Then Tyler's 50 feet in the air without a harness, then that thing where Josh is drumming in the crowd, and so on. Hate on them all you want, but most of the other people on this list are nowhere near them when it comes to putting on a production. I don't need to explain this one much because you can watch what I saw on Netflix, but Bo Burnham's Make Happy was phenomenal. There's laugh out loud comedy, but the whole thing is a fascinating deconstruction of performance as a whole. The choreography is so precise, Bo's presence is both comforting and ominous, it's enthralling. S tier includes some of the best memories of my life. To close out Saturday night at 2019's Newport Folk Festival, I experienced one of the most jaw-dropping collaborations that I've ever heard of. The big surprise guest was Dolly Parton, which, that alone, I'm still pinching myself that I saw Dolly Parton sing, but there were also all of these different combinations of the following women performing together: Yola, Lucy Dacus, Sheryl Crow, Maren Morris, Maggie Rogers, Linda Perry from Four Non Blondes, Jade Bird, Judy Collins, Brandi Carlile, Dolly Parton, and more. It was this empowering, inspirational mix of the old guard and new, and can I just flex again and say that I saw Dolly Parton go from I Will Always Love You to Jolene and then 9 to 5. This one speaks for itself. I saw Jay-Z and Justin Timberlake, two of my all-time favorite musicians, do a ton of their greatest hits on stage together. The setlist was enormous, they had incredible chemistry, they were both having plenty of fun, and it was one of the greatest nights I've ever had. I mentioned it earlier, I saw my #1 favorite artist of all time, Kanye West, on the Yeezus tour. Next level stage production, such a theatrical show. Again, the set list was ridiculous, and I could go on and on forever. If you're a fan of the channel, you'll know that Runaway is my favorite song ever, and I watched these models bring out a box, then he comes out and takes the cover off to reveal what we've all been waiting for, then he slowly walks up, presses one key to make the crowd lose their minds, and I literally started crying from overstimulation. He's the best to ever do it, this was the best night of my life, and I don't have anything else to say right now. Thanks for watching, and comment down below with your memorable concert moments. Thank you for watching that video. If you want to support the channel, feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. You can follow me on social media at WrenchawHS. You can buy my merch, support my Patreon, and thank you again. I'll see you soon.